On the afternoon of August 2nd, 2016, a 30-year-old woman named Karina Vetrano laced up her running shoes, took a quick selfie with her mother Kathy nearby, and stepped out the front door of her family home in Brooklyn, New York. She was heading to Spring Creek Park, a roughly 2-square-mile nature reserve just a few blocks away, tucked inside the East New York section of Brooklyn. It was still daylight. The air was warm. It was the kind of ordinary evening that leaves no reason for alarm. Her father, Phil, a retired firefighter, would normally have gone with her. He had done it countless times, but a back injury kept him home that day. He had told her he did not think she should go alone, that the area was too isolated, that the weeds grew too thick and too tall for comfort. So, Karina told him not to worry. She would be fine. About 45 minutes after she left, something shifted inside Phil. Not a thought, not a fact, but a feeling. Something he could not explain and could not shake. 2 hours passed. Then more. Karina had not come home. Her phone rang without an answer every time he called. He reached out to a childhood friend working with the New York City Police Department. A patrol car was sent to the park. When officers could not locate her, the search expanded. Units from the 106th Precinct moved through reeds that reached 10 feet into the air, combing every inch of the terrain as evening turned to night. At 10:30 that night, officers heard a man screaming somewhere in the darkness. They ran toward the sound. It was Phil. He had found his daughter lying face down in the ground deep inside the tall grass, roughly 15 feet from the running trail. He could not let her go. They had to physically pull him away. He kept saying he needed to take her home. What detectives found at that scene was harrowing. Karina had bruising across her face. She had broken teeth. There were abrasions on her legs. Her sports bra and shorts had been pulled down. The evidence indicated a sexual assault. The outline of a hand was pressed so deeply into her neck that investigators could see it clearly. The medical examiner later confirmed the cause of death was strangulation. She had fought with everything she had. She had bitten her attacker hard enough to break her own teeth. One of her hands was found grasping a fistful of grass, suggesting she had been dragged. She had not gone quietly. Phil later said he believed she led him to her, that she needed it to be him who found her. He carried that with him. Karina Vetrano stood 4 feet 11 inches tall. She held a master's degree from St. John's University and worked as a speech pathologist in Manhattan, where she spent her days helping children with disabilities communicate and find their voices. On weekends and evenings, she worked part-time as a club promoter in Astoria. She was described by everyone who knew her as vibrant, sharp, and full of energy. Her friend Erica called her a little firecracker with a laugh that filled every room she walked into. Her father said she lived every single day as if it were her last. In the days that followed, the investigation poured resources into Spring Creek Park. Detectives fanned out across Howard Beach. Industrial mowers and machetes were brought in to clear 300 feet of dense weeds at a time, slowly and carefully, so no evidence would be destroyed. Drones provided by the FBI swept the federally owned land from above. Every home near the park was canvassed. Registered sex offenders in the area were questioned. A homeless encampment located more than a mile from the scene was investigated and ruled out. Every possible escape route was traced. Among the early leads, investigators looked into a man named Paul, a co-worker of Karina's from the nightclub where she had worked part-time. Friends told investigators that Paul had made unwanted advances toward her and had become aggressive when she rejected him. He had allegedly followed her and shown behavior that alarmed those around her. Police cleared him as a suspect after confirming he was at work during the time of the murder. The investigation pointed more and more toward a stranger, someone Karina had never met. The surrounding community felt it deeply. Residents who jogged those same trails and walked those same paths began to feel afraid to go outside. A 6-month review of Parks Police activity was launched. The sex offender monitoring unit was brought in. Cell phone tower data was being analyzed. A reward fund was established, eventually growing to more than $35,000 through police contributions, a donation from the mayor's office, and a GoFundMe campaign that drew thousands of contributors. On August 6th, an estimated 400 people gathered to say goodbye to Karina. Members of the New York City Fire Department stood among the crowd. Her father delivered a eulogy that tried to hold a lifetime of love inside a few sentences. "She did more in 30 years than 10 people do in a lifetime," he said. "We were not just father and daughter, we were like one and the same." Her parents spoke to reporters outside their home shortly after. Her mother, Kathy, addressed the killer directly. She told him that Karina was a force to be reckoned with, that he would be reckoning with that force not only for the rest of his life, but for all of eternity. The forensic evidence collected from the scene was the investigation's most important asset. A DNA profile was developed using material found under Karina's fingernails and on her mobile phone, which had been located several feet from her body. Investigators were unable to obtain usable DNA from the rape kit itself. The profile was run through the national database and came back without a match. The person responsible either had no prior criminal record or had been incarcerated before the database was established in 1998. On August 31st, a composite sketch was released to the public. It had come from a Verizon employee who had been working in the park on the day of the murder and had noticed a man who seemed out of place. The worker described him as wearing a dark wool cap despite the summer heat. The sketch depicted a black male, approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall, between 35 and 45 years old, with a medium build. After the sketch was made public, a tip came in from a former NYPD chief who was working as a security director at a Brooklyn apartment building. He said one of his tenants looked like the man in the sketch. Officers went to the building. The man, identified only as Kevin, initially refused to open his door. He eventually left the apartment and acknowledged the resemblance. He was brought in for questioning and declined to provide a DNA sample voluntarily. Police later recovered one from a discarded water bottle. It did not match. Kevin was cleared. The investigation returned to the beginning. Surveillance video from one of Karina's earlier runs was released publicly, showing her on what appeared to be her usual route. Investigators hoped someone might recognize something in the footage. Phil pushed hard for the use of familial DNA searching, a technique that uses software to look not for an exact match, but for close relatives of a suspect who might already be in the system. He believed it could narrow the search dramatically and started a petition to allow its use in New York State, which did not yet permit the practice. Civil liberties advocates pushed back, arguing the technique could sweep innocent relatives into criminal investigations. The debate continued while the case remained open. Then in January 2017, something shifted. Lieutenant John Russo, one of the detectives who had been at the scene the night Karina was found, lived in Howard Beach. He had been there from the start. As the months passed without a significant break, Russo began reviewing the case again. Something he had not thought about in months came back to him. A memory from May 2016, more than 2 months before the murder. Russo had been in his own neighborhood when he noticed a man walking away from him on the side of the street. The man was wearing a long-sleeved tracksuit and a hoodie pulled over his head. The temperature was close to 80 degrees. Russo had found it strange enough to watch him. The man appeared to be surveying homes nearby. By the time police arrived, he was gone. The following day, neighbors reported the same individual trespassing through several yards in a black and white tracksuit. Russo later encountered him and asked his name. The young man said his name was Chanel Lewis. Russo had not thought about that encounter again until January 2017, when something told him to look closer. He searched deeper into Chanel Lewis and found that while Lewis had no criminal record, he had received multiple summons in the Brooklyn portion of Spring Creek Park, directly across from the Queens section where Karina had been killed. Russo called his chief with... There was something in the sound of his voice that made the call feel different. Officers located Chanel Lewis and spoke with him. He was cooperative. He told them he was familiar with the area, that he often walked the trails alone to listen to music, that it helped him think. He had few friends and kept mostly to himself. He agreed to provide a DNA swab voluntarily. Investigators also visited his former high school and learned that his past had not been without incident. In May 2011, when he was 15 years old, he had allegedly told a teacher's aide that he wanted to stab his female classmates. He had been taken into custody as an emotionally disturbed person and transported to a hospital for evaluation before being released. The following month, school officials had contacted authorities again after he allegedly threatened a female student and her family. He had been taken to the hospital a second time and released. He was later transferred to a private school for students with behavioral and emotional challenges. Former classmates described him as a loner who was frequently bullied. He was hit, mocked for the way he dressed and the way he looked. Several said he rarely fought back. Others said he never appeared violent or threatening during their time together. The executive director of his high school stated that he had graduated in August 2015 with no disciplinary record and no reported threats during his time at that school. The voluntary DNA swab was processed. It came back as a match to the DNA profile developed from the crime scene. On February 4, 2017, 6 months after Karina was found, Chanel Lewis was taken into custody. The following day, he said to those around him, "Tell my mom I'm sorry. Can I speak to someone from the victim's family? I'm sorry for what I did." During the recorded interrogation on February 5th, he confirmed he had been in Spring Creek Park on the evening of August 2nd, 2016. He said he arrived around 5 in the afternoon. He was walking alone, listening to music. He saw a woman jogging by herself. He said one thing led to another. When pressed, he described grabbing her, hitting her in the face and mouth, dragging her approximately 10 feet off the path, and pulling down her clothing. He said the whole thing lasted about 5 minutes. He said he did it because of anger. Anger he traced back to a man at a previous address whose noise and presence had made him feel unsafe. His father, in trying to defend him, had inadvertently confirmed a critical detail. He told investigators that his son could not have committed the murder because he had taken him to a hospital the day after for treatment of an injured hand, claiming Chanel had been in a fight. Detectives located the physician who had treated him. A foreign object had been removed from his hand. That object was now believed to be a fragment of one of Karina's broken teeth, chipped off when she bit down on her attacker during the struggle. Chanel Lewis was 20 years old when he was charged with second-degree murder. He was held without bail and later indicted on 13 counts including murder and sexual abuse. He entered a plea of not guilty. His family maintained his innocence. His father said Chanel was a wonderful young man, that he was too slight and small to have overpowered someone as strong as Karina. His mother told reporters her son had mental health problems and needed help, that he was not a criminal. The trial began in November 2018. The prosecution described Chanel as a young man who was angry, isolated, and without meaningful social connections or employment. They argued he had seen Karina and acted on that anger in a random, unprovoked attack. The DNA evidence linking him to her fingernails, her neck, and her mobile phone was presented by an expert witness. His videotaped confession was played in court. The defense challenged everything. They argued the confession had been improperly obtained after hours of questioning. They argued the DNA evidence was unreliable because the scene had been disturbed, including by Phil himself the night he found his daughter. They argued no eyewitness placed Chanel at the scene. Defense attorney Jenny Chung told the jury they were trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Some of the images shown during testimony were so graphic that Karina's parents broke down in the courtroom. On at least one occasion, they had to leave. After 7 days, the jury could not agree. 5 jurors refused to return a guilty verdict beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge declared a mistrial. The family of Karina Vetrano walked out of the courtroom in stunned silence. The case went to retrial in March 2019. The prosecution returned with new evidence, including a detailed record of Chanel's online search history from before his arrest. His searches included queries about indictments, plea bargains, prosecution procedures, and news articles covering Karina's murder. The day before deliberations were set to begin, an anonymous letter arrived addressed to the defense. It alleged that at internal strategy meetings early in the investigation, an NYPD chief had suggested officers were looking for two white men from Howard Beach. It further claimed that in gathering DNA, police had conducted what the letter described as a race-based sweep, swabbing more than 360 black men in Howard Beach and surrounding areas. The defense filed motions seeking a hearing. The judge denied them. Deliberations moved forward. On April 1st, 2019, the jury returned a unanimous verdict on the murder charges. Guilty. Phil and Kathy Vetrano walked out of the courtroom. Phil said all the anger and all the years of pain were lifted the moment the verdict was read. Gone, he said. Chanel Luis raised his handcuffed hands in a farewell wave toward his family as he was led away. The sentencing hearing was delayed briefly due to claims of juror misconduct. One juror alleged that another had declared her mind made up before deliberations began. Another juror was accused of sharing personal experience from a prior rape case with fellow jurors. A third was said to have drawn comparisons to injuries from another case. Each allegation was examined. Each was rebutted by sworn affidavits, and the judge ultimately rejected all claims of misconduct. Sentencing was held on April 23, 2019. Karina's parents delivered statements before the court. Her mother brought Karina's shoes into the courtroom, the shoes she had worn to work on August 2, 2016, the morning of the day she died. She held them up and called her daughter a giant, a warrior, and a queen. Phil told Chanel Lewis that Karina had a message for him. That if he stood up and asked for her forgiveness, she would give it. But Phil made clear those were not his own words. He said he would never forgive. The judge sentenced Chanel Lewis to life in prison without the possibility of parole, with an additional 32 years for the second-degree murder and sexual abuse convictions. Lewis spoke briefly. He said he was innocent and that he was sorry for the family's loss, but that he had not done it. Supporters outside the courthouse shut down Queens Boulevard for 2 minutes in protest. Chance called the conviction unjust. Petitions gathered thousands of signatures asking for the case to be reviewed by a conviction integrity unit. His legal team began working on an appeal. As all of that continued, a separate but related thread was finally resolved. Months after Karina's murder, investigators had explored a possible connection to the killing of 27-year-old Vanessa Marcotte, a Google account manager who had gone jogging near her mother's home in Princeton, Massachusetts, and never returned. Her body had been found in a wooded area half a mile away. The cases had similar elements, and detectives had communicated across state lines. In April 2017, a 31-year-old man named Angelo Colon Ortiz was arrested and linked to Vanessa's death through DNA evidence. He later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison in November 2022, ineligible for parole until 2067. The two cases were not connected. In June 2017, while Chanel's case was still working through the courts, the New York State Commission on Forensic Science approved the use of familial DNA searching in murder, rape, and certain other serious cases. The policy Phil had fought for, the petition he had started, the advocacy he had carried through the worst years of his life became law. It came too late to help find Karina's killer, but not too late to help someone else's family in a future case they would never know about. Phil Vetrano still returns to Spring Creek Park. He goes every morning. He sits near the spot where he found his daughter, where her memorial rests among stones and candles, a butterfly made from gathered rocks, and a small angel watching over the grass. He says it is the only place where he has any sense of peace. He says it might seem strange to others that the place where she died is the place that brings him comfort, but he believes it is the only place where he has any control. He speaks to her every day. He says she speaks back in volumes. Karina Vetrano was a daughter and a friend and a young woman who spent her days helping children find their voices. She worked hard, she laughed loudly, and she went for a run on a summer evening the way she had done so many times before. She never came home from that run. What happened to her in those tall reeds beside a Brooklyn trail is brutal and final, but it was not the whole of who she was. Her family made certain of that. A scholarship was established in her name. Her story was kept alive through public memory and continued advocacy. The community she loved carried her forward. Out of something so terrible, something lasting was built. That was not an accident. That was the work of the people who loved her most, refusing to let the manner of her death become the only thing the world remembered about her life.